This is True Warrior in Lipstick by CGP. This episode is brought to you by Pause for Supplement, integrating rhythms of reflection to cultivate a contemplative practice to nourish the soul in microdose short form. Available via YouTube at True Warrior in Lipstick by CGP. Welcome to this episode of Configurations and Conversations, where I feature a special guest to speak on sojourns and spheres and accentuate fellow warriors who took transformative tides of transits, transfiguring traumas into testimonies of triumph. Today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined once again by my good friend, Hollie Meador. We hope you enjoy this episode and find some insights into parallel energies present in your astrological natal chart that may serve as a guide in your journey. Let's take a listen. Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl G. Pajo. Let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest, who I'm so grateful to be back here with me for this conversation. Hollie is a mother, friend, yoga instructor, and astrologer currently living outside of Austin, Texas. She co-owns a yoga studio centered around building community where she has the opportunity to teach and learn from people of all ages. She is attuned to increasing awareness of the depth, expanse, and sacredness of this human experience, observing all the ways our stories weave together. Nothing brings her greater joy than witnessing the joy of her own children. She considers herself a lifelong learner. Everyone, welcome back, Hollie Meador. Welcome back, Hollie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Cheryl.
I am so delighted and thankful that you're back. So before we dive into the vast ocean of Pisces, let me once again preface the transit as we are doing this recording. So Saturn has recently, as of 7 a.m. Central Time, ingressed the sign of Pisces, where there is a current stellium shared by the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune, which is the co-ruler in modern astrology. And of course, in ancient Hellenistic astrology, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. And so, Hollie, please remind us again of your sun, moon, rising, and your Pisces credentials, if you will.
My credentials, that's awesome. I am a Virgo rising, Pisces moon, Aquarius sun. I'm with Virgo rising, Pisces shows up in the 7th house, so angular, and I'm born at night, so the moon is my sect light. And growing up, I didn't put so much emphasis, or before studying Hellenistic astrology, I didn't think of putting so much emphasis on these places in my life, like the 7th house and Pisces in general. But the more that I've studied and the older I get, it feels like it's definitely influential in my life in a number of different ways. So I'm happy to talk about it today.
That's wonderful. I do want to note that we do share the same zodiacal placement. So it's a very exciting conversation right now because Hollie and I share Virgo in the 1st house and Pisces in the 7th. These are, as Hollie mentioned, are angular houses, so it's pretty potent and prominent in the life of the native. And where Hollie has her moon, her sect light in Pisces, I do have Venus exalted in Pisces with a descendant. And so it's a very exciting time as we both share, so to speak, goddess placement, if you will, in the sign of Pisces, where Pisces, in one of its significations, celebrate oneness, spirituality, unity and harmony, and just really embracing the spiritual dimensions, if you will. And so, Hollie, let's go ahead and start. What are some of, in your life to date, what are some of the potent Pisces archetypal significations that you have noticed in the past few decades, if you will. Not to give away Holly and I's age, but
yeah, they're decades under our belts. It's cool. It's funny. I teach kids yoga, and we often share how old we are at the beginning of class. And I'm 44. I say it with pride every time, but they're like, "Oh, you're my mom's age." Or like, "Oh, you're older than my dad." Or it's just like shocking. Like, yeah, I am, and I'm still playful, my friends. So
yes.
Okay, that's like way off topic. And also, actually, as you were talking, and as I even first spoke, I was like, oh my gosh, both of our chart rulers are now in Pisces, and like, just bless us in
this conversation. It could just go way outside. But I mean, Saturn's there to help wrangle this conversation, hopefully. So
yeah. Even earlier, like when I started talking, I had a thought come in, and then it just immediately like dissipated and just blurred right out. And I was like, well, I'm just going to keep going. So that might happen again. Likely. Anyways, okay. Potent Pisces archetypal significations. I guess in some ways I've always been very attached to like intimate relationships. Like my friends are very important to me. I do really well in smaller groups and like one-on-one. I love big groups also. I love going to festivals or, larger things, or at least I used to. I haven't in a while. Given my choice, I would rather like have dinner with a close friend and just talk about whatever for hours, or go on a walk or go on a hike. And I'm an only child, but my friends have always been really important to me. My friends have been like my family. And I've been told that when people talk to me, they're like, oh, we just like get right to the heart of the matter. Like we get to just like some spiritual things like immediately. And I've had lots of people throughout my life point that out. I don't know if this is totally related. It is actually. I can speak to that in a moment. But where I will have just strangers like walk up to me and just tell me like their life story. And so I feel like having my moon in Pisces there, I think, is perhaps this reflection of like a nurturing. People have told me I'm very like motherly. And when I expressed that, there was part of me growing up where I didn't think I would be a mom. I didn't think I was like qualified for that. Where they're like, are you kidding me? You're like the most maternal person I know. I'm like, really? I didn't know you knew that about me, like in college. Like that's crazy. So what I kind of wanted to speak to more is this idea of like the triplicity. And this helps me visualize what Pisces is, because Pisces is like so many things. I feel like it's kind of hard to nail down and have a clear archetype that you're working with. So, but when I think of it in relationship to the other water signs, this is the feminine water temple of Jupiter. There is, the water temple of the moon itself, right? And I've heard Cancer described as like, if you're thinking in terms of like bodies of water, it's like the waves on top of the ocean. And it's like the ups and downs and the undulation. And sometimes they're really big, sometimes they're small, but it's sort of that surface. It's like the emotion that you come into contact with. It's what you see most visibly. And then the second water sign is Scorpio, right? And the temple of like the feminine temple of Mars. Ooh, it can like get down, right? Like, but it gets into some depths. It's like the very bottom of the ocean, which we know is like endless. But it gets down there. It's comfortable down at the bottom, and then like getting down to the bottom helps give like perspective also. Like, and you can't really get perspective until you kind of get down underneath, which Scorpio is like great for that, right? And then Pisces is again this temple of Jupiter, and it's like the whole ocean, like this mass abyss of just all of it, and which is really hard to fathom. When I think of that for myself, and the fact that, okay, my moon is in Pisces, and it's related to the 11th house for me, for us Virgo risings, and that I feel like that reflects the deep friendships that are possible. And then equally, like the third house being Scorpio for us, that like I want to know my environment in like a really deep way, and I want to be connected genuinely and deeply with people who are in my community. And I don't have any siblings, but again, like my friends feel like my family. So that's sort of how the archetype of Pisces has shown up for me. And I was thinking more about like, wow, how cool it is that actually Saturn's neighbors are both Jupiter temples. And there's something where like you have to kind of like draw in, right, to be able to expand out, which I think is really beautiful, that we're like moving into that place now where like we've had these 5 years of sort of like being called to be drawn inward. And we go through it every, 20 something years, 27 years. But how potent it was, especially with the pandemic happening, and that we were all like, not only metaphorically, but like literally called inside.
That's right.
And how I don't know, how Saturn has just shown up throughout all of it with some major aspects and some major transits, sort of bookmarking all these places along the way in the past few years. And so now as it like moves into Pisces, where it can be like expansive, it also wants to like hold the boundaries. And in a lot of ways, I've been reflecting in the past few weeks, like, we're 3 years into the pandemic now. Some might say we're still in it. I think we are in some ways, but it's like, have you been doing your work? Have you been refining whatever needed to be refined, depending on what house, Saturn was moving through, what houses it was moving through. And then how is that sort of being applied? And I feel like there's like this call to find connection with what is like unexplainable, which is part of Pisces. What is like, you have to like believe it before you see it in a way. We want to see it to believe it, but I think really you have to like believe it to see it. And I feel like that's maybe part of what Saturn is going to be doing the next couple of years here, is like giving the container. It doesn't happen like that. We always like, ooh, it's like today is a big day, no doubt. But it doesn't all happen just today. It happens. It's been happening and it continues to happen. And I feel like that's all part of Pisces as well.
When you said that it's such it comes naturally when you could be out and about and people just start sharing their life or just really opening up. And I can reflect back on just my life as well, just saying hello to people, and then the next thing you know, we're exchanging phone numbers, or they're sharing their grandkids' life story. And in my head, I was like, I just said hi. What you said about Saturn having Jupiter's temples as its neighbors, I think about Sagittarius and how it's carefree, and then goes, Capricorn, and having these boundaries and containing. And then we think about Pisces coming after Aquarius, where Pisces is so free loving, and it's almost that beginning of being free and being carefree as an individual, and then being free as a collective, and Saturn being in the middle of that vastness, if you will, but in like two different expressions.
I do love that. I want to talk to that a little bit.
Yes, please.
Just like what you're talking about, it's like, yeah, we move from like freedom to like more, freedom, constrain, freedom. The Jupiter thing just occurred to me fairly recently, where I was like, oh, I know it, that, but I was just thinking about it in this different way. And, but like we need, like Saturn is often depicted as this like stern old man, to be feared and avoided, but really like Saturn feels so neutral to me. And like we can't just be untethered and like, going. We have to come back in, right? We have to inhale to exhale. We have to destroy to create. You know, we have to, in creation, we're actually destroying. Like a blank canvas is in many ways just like perfect and pure. And then we come in with our colors and our, and it's interesting having Saturn, exalted in Libra, where, the whole idea is balance and how it's related to Venus. And here you're talking about Venus also being exalted in Pisces, and Saturn is not dignified one way or another, but it has this relationship with Venus in the way that, like, you have to know what you don't like to know what you do like. And you have to, you have to know what your boundaries are to what you're working with and what you're working within, to like fully expand. And you have to know like a friend told me yesterday, and I talked about this during my yoga class. She was like, I have these 2 fig trees in my yard, and I was like doing some yard work and decided I was going to prune them, but I only got around to pruning one. And then 2 days later, she looked out, and the one that she had pruned it's starting to grow and bloom. And the other one is still stuck in its state of dormancy. And it's like, you have to prune things to like encourage growth, and I feel like that's a very Saturnine thing, to come in and say, okay, we don't need this anymore. We don't need this. And then like you can really expand and grow. And maybe that's part of the process for the next like 2.5 years too, because like as Saturn moves through Pisces, that it's not really until we get to Aries where things start, in theory, things can grow and be new and die and regenerate all the time, right? But like Aries is more of this action of like actually growing and expanding out. So I don't know, I feel like, we're moving into a place of like pruning, like we have all these options, but we can't do it all,
Right.
We can't visit the whole ocean at once.
Right. It reiterates what we've shared in the first episode, how in our study of astrology, how poetic it can be. And in those lines or rhythm of reflection, there is so many jewels to unpack. And that's one of the many gifts of astrology. This episode is brought to you by BYCGP Bits. It's an invitation to pause for pithy, deep listening practice, creating a compassionate space for reflective resonance, initiating inspired action. Available here in YouTube and in all BYCGP socials. Do you have any prominent Piscean manifestations in those houses with Saturn also, I feel like, structuralizing formless matter, if you will?
Well, gosh, yeah, it's interesting. With the angular houses, it's like these are sort of the main components of life that we all as humans move through, right? And they're always sort of in tension with one another, which is fascinating to think about. And we're always sort of making a choice between like self and other, 1st and 7th. We're making a choice between self and career, 1st and 10th, self and family, 1st and 4th, and 10th and 4th. And there's always that tension riding, and you're always sort of like making a choice between the two. And at the same time, I think it's possible to integrate all of it. Not that you're, like when I'm like, right now I'm not with my kids, but I can't be with my kids all the time and be a balanced human being.
Right.
So there is like, continuously that you're always kind of making a choice between like one and the other in some ways. And that aspect between the 1st and the 7th, it's funny because having Saturn in the 1st, I don't think I always like gave myself the attention that I gave to others. Really what I think wants to come out is the fact that like Saturn takes time, it takes time to see the fruits of labor. I feel like it takes time. Like I tend to move a little more slowly through things. And I, even though I have Mercury and Mars and the Sun all in a stellium together, my mind can work very fast, but like actually putting all of that and like manifesting it takes time. with the current transits, I'm coming into a Saturn opposition. I was reflecting earlier this morning, just like how I took out the calculator. I'm like, how old was I? Because it was like 16, 17, 18, right around in there, right? Mm-hmm. When this was happening. And, so reflecting back there, like I was in high school, I was a competitive swimmer. At that time I was starting to consider where I wanted to go to college. And I did swim in college, so I started like thinking about, where I wanted to go on recruiting trips and that kind of stuff. But when I was 17, I injured my back really badly. I technically sprained my back, I guess, and I still have like scar tissue under my shoulder blade. And but I'm wondering if that's actually when Saturn was either opposed to my natal Saturn or when it was passing over my moon. Because with my moon in the 7th, I'm going through, in Vedic astrology, it's called Sati Sati. And it's this 7-year-long period of time, roughly 7 years. It's where Saturn enters the sign before your natal moon, as it transits your natal moon sign, and then the 2.5 years after. So it's sort of this big wave of energy that can create a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. And I find it interesting that, I injured myself, and it was really difficult coming back from that as a swimmer. And I swam in college, and but it was sort of this thing that I was very passionate about and had built a lot of my life around. And I sort of like gradually was like losing that. I became like not as competitive as I was, whether it was related to that incident. I think it may have been maybe slightly before that. That the moon can be your physical body, and that it was like in opposition to my first house, which is also can be the physical body, the self. I feel like that was really interesting, that maybe I was, not taking care of myself in the way that I should have been. But part of me is like, maybe I didn't need to do that for as long as I did. My point, though, is that right now, the past 9 months or so, I've been really more focused on my health, which I know, like Saturn moving through my 6th, that sort of like speaks to that. But I didn't feel unhealthy. I didn't feel really sick in a lot of ways. I was just like refining things. That helped me, I feel like, ward off some illnesses in some places where it could have been like getting COVID again, or getting, even just being run down enough to have a cold or something, where there was a lot of illness moving through like our yoga studio. And I work with kids. I get like sneezed in the face, like all the time. And I do feel like putting into place some places of discipline, like some moments of discipline where like I didn't drink coffee for a long time. I really was watching what I ate. I just really listened to my body. I think it was really beneficial and helpful. So I hadn't thought about hurting myself until just this morning. So now I'm like, do I need to really proceed with caution and really, really tune in and tap into those things that I learned like in the past 9 months, and be really mindful of the way I'm using my body and related to my health, so that I can be, present for the other work that I'm doing.
I reflect on how you've shared your stories. Granted, I am not a swimmer, but I do find joy in the water. And with Venus exalted in Pisces in my placement, just listening to the stories, and it's almost like, well, here are some things to look out for and to be mindful of, right? And so I find rest and trust and peace with Venus exalted in Pisces sitting there in my natal, and Jupiter in Taurus in the 9th house. So I do have the benefics close by to mitigate the expressions still, though. I mean, Saturn is the malefic out of sex. Speaking of how Saturn in our chart is the malefic out of sex, having gone out of the 5 years, if you will, of trying, testing, challenging times that Saturn brings in terms of growing and transmuting stories and energetic expressions. How have you been reflecting this ingress with Saturn coming in Pisces conjunct your natal moon and now positioning in a Saturn opposition? And with Neptune there, generational planet, it's a slower moving planet. It's not like Neptune's going to come out of Pisces anytime soon. So
No.
please share some of your reflections with this.
Just to speak to Neptune, I haven't been able to think too much about it. It's like sitting right on top of my descendant, right? Opposing my, like every time I try thinking about it, it just like, it just like hides in a corner of the ocean. And I'm like, okay, I'll see you later.
Okay. For the collective in general, Saturn moving into a new sign it's a big deal because it's going to be there for 2.5 years. But having come out of 2 consecutive Saturn transits, in his temple in Capricorn, then Aquarius, and we know what has happened in the past 3-ish years. Coming into Pisces, it's a different energy. What have been your reflections on this major ingress of Saturn to Pisces, especially you have their natal moon?
Here's something like collectively. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, which Saturn was in Capricorn at that point. Suddenly we're all inside. A lot of people have a lot of anxiety, so many unknowns. And you were really like forced inside the cave, your own cave, the cave of your mind, the cave of your soul. And I think we were all forced to do a little bit of reflecting. I know I was, but I feel like I also saw that reflected in, Facebook posts and Instagram posts, which were like the way to communicate and be connected still. But I remember seeing it mentioned, a few times, but I specifically remember this one friend from high school made a post and he was saying something. He's like, I've been thinking so much about this, how he had really fallen away from his ability to connect with God, that this had suddenly given him an opportunity to reflect on what had like pulled him away from his own spiritual practice, and how he was like, oh, like, when you strip all the other things away, you really just have like your relationships and your connection with whatever else gives you strength. And it can just come, it could be just fully inner sourced. It can be outer sourced. But we all kind of have that spiritual connection on some level, even if it is all just, your belief is that it's all working just internally and you are, solo in that journey. So I feel like in a way Saturn like created that. Saturn, is seen as this like this stern old man, but really I think Saturn is neutral and finds balance and is more about like, it is on the outer lines. It is like encouraging you to like the outer limits of yourself, which is really like inside. It's encouraging each of us to, the cave of our heart and to dwell inwardly, to then be able to expand outwardly. And it's very mystical in that way, and it's very mysterious in that way. And I think a lot of us don't want to be confronted with that, and we will use a lot of things to distract us, whether it's work or gatherings or all the things that pull us out of contemplation and time, quietness and solitude, because that can be scary, meeting all those darker places and finding ways to integrate them. I feel like Pisces is almost like more of that in some ways. For Saturn, it's like, okay, again, often seen as scary, but really if you're like doing your work, if you're coming to those places, you don't have to sit there for like 3 hours every day, but like if you're visiting them somewhat regularly, you can find time to weave it into your life, like it being whatever emerges out of the darkness, and you can find ways to integrate it, or like you're going to get hit upside the head with it. Like you're going to be met with those places no matter what. And I feel like Saturn always comes, and even this opposition, like when you're 14 through 16, right? Like that's about the time that people often go through their first Saturn opposition. And you're like, that's like the teenage years, and there's always all that conflict and all that. And it's like, no, it's actually just this natural place for us to come around and like look at where we've been and like, okay, is this what I want to keep going? Where I want to keep going? Is this what I want to keep doing? If it is, then cool, keep going. If it's not, you have to make changes. Changes are hard. Accepting that is difficult sometimes, like accepting that you want to do something differently, or you have, you're being called to something different. So I feel like collectively there's this aspect, and moving into Pisces, which is a very mysterious place. I think it naturally calls up the mystical places of our lives. And Saturn can often be like the mystic. Like you think of like the hermit living in the cave and doing yoga and levitating and, whatever. I think we're being called to a higher amount of devotion, and we're all devoting ourselves to something, no matter what, where we focus our energy, like where we focus our attention, that's where our energy is going. So we get to choose. Again, it's not like instantaneous, and it's not like just because we're past the, Aquarius house of our lives that those lessons can't continually be refined and practiced. But, we're kind of moving on to the next thing, and we get to like integrate those. Find ways not only to be like disciplined, but how to be like devoted to something. Like I feel like there's likely something that each of us want to, like our heart's desire, to like make a reality. I feel like we have that opportunity now.
I can't help but be reminded as you were speaking, the time that I lived in Santa Monica, where after I have mindfulness sessions with clients, I would come to Santa Monica Beach to recharge and reflect. And that was the picture that I was getting in my head as you were speaking, in how I see the confluence of Saturnine energies and Piscean openness, unifying, free-flowing, and so much in the spiritual realm. Pisces in our 7th house, I think about 7 being a Saturn number, and 7 being the place of rest, the place of descent. And in astrology, in the wheel, it's also a house about union, having that intimacy with a loved one. Think about Saturn and the ring and the commitment, how it's coming in Pisces, Saturn being referenced as the mystic and the monastic and the hermit, even though we also refer to Mercury as the hermit. They share in astrology. And so with that Virgo-Pisces axis, Virgo in itself is a mystic, it's a seeker, and Pisces as well, sharing healing energies, healer energies, seeker energies, and in a multi-dimensional facet. The convocation of this mystical energies in the temple of Jupiter opposing Virgo, it's giving me this esoteric vibes where it came to challenge, to pose as a chronic challenger of consciousness, whether it's the individual consciousness or the collective or the zeitgeist or the metaphysical awareness. It's mystical in so many dimensions, right? Because of all the energies coming in together.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. And even something you were just saying, even Jupiter is seen as like the sage, And I was just thinking about like the potentiality of this time, and I get really excited by it. And I know I can be like a little bit idealistic about things, which maybe speaks to my Aquarian stellium, and just also Moon and Pisces. I'm like, it's also dreamy. Jupiter is just so much potential. I don't think that it looks any one way, like I think we're all given our natural talents, and I think we're all given our paths in life. If we really just like refine and like live up to that and prune what we don't need and keep like exploring and being open, and that's like a continual process. It's not like you just prune one time and it's done, it's like every cycle, and there's cycles within cycles, but it's a continual process. There's just so much potential. And I know we'll never be like living in some utopia, because that's just not life on Earth, right? That there's just naturally always going to be a duality. but we have to, at least here in this realm, we have to have the opposing to make sense of the thing. Like the thing doesn't exist without its opposite, right? Like light doesn't exist without dark here. So there's always going to be a little darkness. Like there's just always going to be. We can't inhale without exhaling. We can't be holding like all these things. I can't receive until I like let something go. You know? But it's hard. Like it's hard. And I tend to be like a holder on to her, and I get very attached, you know, sentimentally to a number of things, and I have to just keep refining.
It's fascinating. Virgo is in our first house. Yeah. It is the ascending sign. And then Pisces is the descending sign in the 7th. And then comes Saturn, the representative of border in between heaven and earth, in spirit and matter. Chronos, challenging the consciousness. What do you believe in the earthly form? What do you believe in the spiritual form?
Yeah.
I feel like that is a great invitation. After all the years, Saturn has put us in more of like a testing, challenging camp.
Yeah.
Here comes the invitation. How do you put that in application? This is spoken by someone in the realm of healing arts, you and myself. That is part of living, right? In the inhale and exhale. As you touched on earlier, in the creation and destruction, life is cyclical. This form that we're in is cyclical. There is a going and coming, and there is a receiving and releasing. And I feel Saturn's ingress in Pisces invites us. Any mystical meditations and reflections?
I think you summed that up really beautifully. Well, as you were talking, the song Heaven on Earth came to mind. Oh, baby, do you know what that's worth? Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
I wonder if that was released when Saturn ingress Pisces.
I know, right? Love comes first, who needs heaven on? We can't ever like erase all the negativity and suffering and everything, but I think we can also like choose to live a more intentional life, and I feel like that requires us to like slow down, to really take it all in, to, you know, explore the world. And I feel like get more connected with nature. Like I love how you went to the ocean to recharge, you know, and I see this woman sitting underneath a blossoming tree and she's recharging, but where it's like these places, these green spaces are becoming more and more rare, and time to get into these places is becoming, it feels like, more and more scarce. And you have to be really intentional with getting your feet on the ground and having your eyes look at all the different layers of color and texture that exist outside of a screen and outside of our interior spaces. And it's funny how so much of even like what we create on the inside of our homes is like just replicating what's right outside. And so that's been something, it occurred to me like a month or two ago. It's like I really need to be in nature more, and I feel like I am a pretty good amount, but I felt, you know, I get into my rhythms of just like going to work, driving to the store, to, you know, just kind of being on the go, not making, you know, just sitting by water part of my daily routine. I've tried to, you know, sneak into different parks and stuff around town when I can, or be intentional about if we're meeting friends, like, hey, let's go on a hike, or let's go, you know, do this thing outside. You know, just as I'm looking out at nature right now and having just sat in nature, I feel like there's a call to that, but that's like a connection point as well, like with the mystical and the mystery. Like, how do these plants know it's time to bloom? Like, how did they know? And like, here they are there, and it's not all at once either, right? It's like everything in its own timing, but once it starts, it just like flows. It just flows, which is part of Pisces also, right? And like, so getting into that flow, like seeing, what do I need to prune? What do I need to, where do I want to grow? maybe even considering where do I want to grow before pruning. I don't know. But yeah, maybe it starts with just like laying down on the ground for a little bit.
I love it. Saturn coming in, grounding the spirit. Like, how do we ground it? How do we bring it here in the physical? How can we make it practical? How can we make it tangible? How can we contain it? 7 being a Saturnine number, and in the Bible, 7 is a number of completion. And I think about Pisces is the completion of the cycle, and how Saturn came in to check some boxes, and then as we start afresh and start anew, what's coming in, what's arising, how do we welcome it and ground it with curiosity and compassion?
Something you said, like, and I had thought of this the other day, but how beautiful it is how water takes the shape of anything that it's contained by, like the shape of water. Like, what is the container you're going to present for like the water to be held in, you know? Like that's, I think, maybe part of what we're doing here as well. So
beautiful. I love it. Thank you. I appreciate you so much, Hollie. Thank you for coming back and picking up our conversation in the season of the moment and Saturn's wisdom and lesson. And for those listening, please share where people can find you and what you're up to.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, I teach yoga in Austin, Texas. I co-own a yoga studio called Studio Satya, and we have yoga for all ages, from like babies, crawlers and toddlers, kids, adults, everyone in between. And I've started doing some readings, and you can find me at therainbowweaver.com. So I have like my yoga offerings on there as well, but also some things about astrology. Check me out there.
There you go. And I'll add Hollie's links on the description of this episode. Thank you so much, Hollie. I appreciate you. I love speaking with you and having to share this space with you and sharing your wisdom to our listeners. Thank you
so much for having me.
I appreciate your energy and your presence. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.